Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I am David Paulides, and you are tuning in to Unsolved Void. Friends, there is something so inherently fascinating, maybe even morbid, about our collective obsession these days with death, murder, and the truly unexplained. We see it everywhere. Television, the internet, true crime podcasts, and who in this community hasn't sat for hours, deep into the night, watching shows about serial killers who've never been caught, or diving into the strange and deeply unsettling abyss of unsolved disappearances? It truly seems like a bad train wreck, doesn't it? We know we shouldn't look, but we can't help but do it anyway. Here on Unsolved Void, we try to respectfully cover as many of those strange, mysterious missing person cases and murders as we can, and we always try to do it in depth. Sometimes, though, there just isn't enough reliable information for us to go fully in depth or as deep into the case as we would like. But we still feel these people, their situations, and their stories must be talked about and discussed lest they be forgotten. And sometimes it's not a person at all, but an entity or an event which has some strange, bizarre mystery lurking around it, a case where we just can't let go and need to know more. What I've put together for you today is a collection of some of the most mysterious deaths, chilling unsolved disappearances, and perplexing incidents that we could find. We're going to explore these cases, and then we'll try to layer on some of the high strangeness that our research has uncovered in other similar incidents. Could you, or someone you know, hold the clue to unlock these mysteries? Let's dive in. Our first case takes us back to the chilling days of 1872 and the ultimate maritime riddle, the case of the Mary Celeste. On December 5th, 1872, the American merchant ship was found adrift approximately 400 miles east of the Azores Islands of Portugal, located in the eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean. A Canadian vessel came across the drifting ship, which was still at partial sail, and stopped the ship to investigate what the issue was. What they found only deepened the mystery. The Mary Celeste was carrying a full cargo load of casks of industrial alcohol and enough food and water to last several people a few months. The crew's personal belongings were all found on and around their bunks, untouched. And here is the truly unsettling part. Only one of the ship's lifeboats was found to be missing, yet the ship was otherwise completely and totally devoid of people. She had left New York and was headed to Italy with 10 souls aboard. 7 crew members, the ship's captain, his wife, and their daughter, who was only 2 years old at the time. No sight or sign of any of them was ever found. Their disappearance, a total and baffling mystery. Theories have circulated since the ship was located. Some speculate they fled due to fear of alcohol fumes leaking from the casks causing a possible explosion, a plausible but unproven scenario. Others say they must have fallen victim to pirates, who illogically carried off the people but not the valuable cargo, which makes no sense at all. Even the famous Sir Arthur Conan Doyle wrote a fictional story about a similar ship where everyone on board had been murdered, a fictitious account sometimes taken as what actually happened, adding further confusion to the official record. But the truth is, no one knows what fate truly befell the passengers on that ship, especially since the captain had always sworn he would never abandon his ship. Now, let's look at this through the Unsolved Void lens. The ocean, particularly that stretch of the Atlantic, has its own unique high strangeness energy signature. We have numerous reports of UFOs and inexplicable aerial phenomena observed over the ocean, sometimes interacting with vessels. Could the missing lifeboat be a classic misdirection? Did they truly launch the lifeboat, only to be overwhelmed by a sudden catastrophic event, a sudden storm that appeared out of a dimensional rift, perhaps? Or, going back to the core of the unexplained disappearances we track, was this an instantaneous, complete removal of all human biological signatures by something other? The idea that the whole crew was abducted by some sort of extraterrestrials is just as good a theory as any other at this point. The pattern people vanished, but possessions and valuables left untouched is, sadly, one we see repeated far too often. What do you think? Next, we shift gears and travel from the high seas to the most isolated, desolate location on Earth, the South Pole. This is the deeply disturbing case of Rodney Marks. On May 12, 2000, an Australian astrophysicist named Rodney Marks was stationed in the middle of a very dark and extremely frigid Antarctic winter. He was at the Amundsen Scott Station, an American scientific research base located right near the South Pole, completely cut off from the outside world. There were only 49 other people there with Rodney, and they were all basically trapped at that location until the spring thaw. Remember, there are no winter flights to or from the South Pole because they are far too dangerous and risky, making every soul there a suspect. Rodney Marks died on that 12th of May, and what happened to him and who was involved remains a profound mystery. Because of the conditions, his body had to be frozen and kept at the base until spring, when flights finally started again. At the time, all anyone knew was that he had died of some type of mysterious illness. Once his body was eventually flown back to New Zealand and finally thawed out, the stunning, dark truth was revealed. He had been murdered, poisoned by methanol. All 49 other people trapped there with him for the winter immediately became suspects. Rodney had most likely consumed the toxic substance without even knowing it. The authorities eventually ruled out that he had taken his own life, and also thought it highly unlikely he had drunk the substance accidentally. Everyone was interviewed, of course, but nothing ever came from any of it, and eventually, foul play was strangely ruled out as a factor in his untimely demise. This is why this case is sometimes referred to as the first murder committed at the South Pole, a crime without a criminal. So, let's step back. How does someone die from methanol poisoning without being murdered, without it having been an accident, and without them having done it to themselves to take their own life? This is where the sheer strangeness of the location must be considered. Antarctica is a known hub of unusual activity, sightings of enormous dark structures, reports of unexplained phenomena, and whispers of clandestine operations. Imagine the psychological strain of being trapped there, in that absolute perpetual darkness. What if the methanol poisoning was less about a human motive and more about a rapid, unexplained breakdown under extreme duress or exposure to something non-human? Could this death be connected to whatever high strangeness research the base might have been conducting? Perhaps an interaction with a hidden cryptid, or an exposure to an element that caused severe psychological distress? Or what if the substance was consumed by accident, but the source was a contaminated vessel or supply that had been exposed to an unknown primordial element from a source outside of human intervention? It's a chilling thought. We may never find the answers to this. What's your opinion? Next up, in 1931, in Liverpool, there lived a lovely husband and wife named Julia and William Wallace. William was an insurance salesman. The couple seemed normal enough until one day in January of that year, when something happened that is so bizarre and mysterious that it has since come to be known as the impossible murder. William Wallace had received a message one evening from someone asking him to meet them at an address on Menlove Gardens East so they could discuss policies. He was hesitant, but during the Depression, he figured he would take what he could get as far as sales. On January 21st, 1931, William left his home and headed to his appointment with the mysterious man. William tried to find the address, but after a while of searching and some strange circumstances, found the address he had been called to simply did not exist. Frustrated and a bit confused, William headed home, only to claim that upon returning, he found his wife, Julia, murdered, bludgeoned to death in the living room. It was the perfect, brief absence. William was eventually convicted of his wife's murder, but then his conviction was overturned on appeal. There just wasn't enough evidence. Actually, there wasn't really any evidence to definitively prove his guilt, only the convenience of his absence. Historical researchers have since speculated that the murder was committed by a co-worker of Wallace's, whom he had fired, or that the whole thing was a perfectly timed, coincidental prank call that Wallace seized upon to set up his alibi. But what if we step outside the mundane theories of human betrayal and look at the precision of the timing? The fake phone call, the non-existent address, the perfect period of absence. Could the setup for this murder have been influenced by something far more sophisticated? Think about the concept of a time travel mystery, the perfect manipulation of a single moment to ensure a fatal outcome and a cast iron alibi for the person who was framed. Or consider a deliberate, highly orchestrated action from an unknown group, an element of what we might call a dimensional rift or a momentary tear in reality. This rift could have allowed someone to bypass the constraints of time and space to commit the crime and escape instantly, making the murder truly impossible to solve. The call to Menlove Gardens East was not a prank, but a complex signal that initiated a sequence of events designed to fail purely to ensure William Wallace was away from the scene at the precise moment the deed was done. The crime is too neat, too perfectly framed by a non-event. Finally, we arrive at Australia's most enduring and mysterious death, known as the Tamam Shud case. This title comes from a Persian phrase that was printed on a small scrap of paper found in the dead man's pocket. The man was found dead on Somerton Beach, south of Adelaide, in December of 1948. The only things found on the body were a train ticket, a few cigarettes, a comb, and that tiny scrap of paper with the Persian phrase. There was absolutely no identification. Tamam Shud translates to the end from Persian to English, which in and of itself wasn't a clue. However, this piece of paper was eventually found to be torn from a very rare edition of a book of poetry called the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam. Even more mysterious, the pathologist who performed the autopsy strongly suspected that the unnamed man had died from a rare poisoning, but the specific poison and how it came about is still shrouded in mystery, defying any conventional toxicology. The police eventually located what seemed to be the book the scrap of paper came from. The book, which they came across by some unknown and unnamed means, also contained a phone number that led them to an Australian woman. This woman claimed she didn't know the deceased man and that while she had once owned a copy of the rare book, she had lent it to someone, but she would never name that person. To add to the confusion, there was also some handwritten code throughout the book which seemed to be a series of letters, but the code was never cracked, and it's still unknown what it all said and meant. This has led many to believe this points to espionage, perhaps a Cold War spy ring operating in Australia at the time, and that the Tamam Shud case had something to do with that, a simple hit. But let's think about this differently. We are talking about a nameless man, a cryptic death by undetectable poison, a coded message, and a rare book. What if the true nature of the secret was not military, but something far more esoteric? What if the man was a contact, or a courier, for a group dealing with something so secretive, so strange, that its agents needed to operate completely outside the boundaries of identity? The poison suggests a perfect surgical removal of a problem by someone who didn't want the body found. Was this man a key piece of a massive UFO disappearances puzzle, or perhaps involved in a top-secret government operation concerning things like ancient cryptids or the true history of the planet? His identity was scrubbed, his final message cryptic, and his cause of death near invisible. It's a case where there are just no answers at all, and the full story is one you'll likely never hear again. Sometimes, folks, cases come along where there are just no definitive, rational answers. Usually, we can live with that because when we follow the facts and the evidence, it leads to some sort of reasonable conclusion. But then there are cases like the ones we've discussed today, the Mary Celeste, Rodney Marks, the Impossible Murder, and the Somerton Man, where there are not only no rational answers or any factual evidence that sticks, there are also no reasonable conclusions that could be drawn. We are all left frustrated and scratching our heads until we move on to the next one, wondering what really happened in the shadows. What do you think of these strange cases? Which one resonates most with the theories of high strangeness we explore here on Unsolved Void? I look forward to your comments below, but please keep it friendly and respectful. Until we meet again on the trail, be good to yourselves and each other. Stay safe out there. I'm David Paulides, and I'll talk to you next time.